The Secret of the Enchanted Forest. Part 1. In a quiet village surrounded by rolling hills and thick, green forests, there was an old and mysterious forest that all the villagers knew about. This was not an ordinary forest, no, this forest was different. The trees were tall and ancient, their trunks twisted in strange shapes as though they had stories to tell. People often said that the enchanted forest had its own life, its own spirit, and that the deeper you went into it, the more you could feel its magic. The villagers, however, avoided the forest. It wasn't that they didn't admire its beauty, on the contrary, they did. They loved the way the sunlight filtered through the thick branches, the way the air smelled sweet with the scent of pine and wild flowers. But the forest was said to be dangerous. There were old stories about travelers who ventured too far and never came back. Some said they had gotten lost, while others whispered about strange creatures that roamed in the depths of the forest, creatures that no one had ever seen but everyone feared. The village, nestled at the edge of the forest, had a population of just over 200 people. It was a simple place where everyone knew each other and everyone helped one another. There was a small market in the center of the village where the villagers could buy fresh bread, vegetables, and meats. Life was peaceful and time moved slowly, but there was always the mysterious presence of the enchanted forest that seemed to loom over the village just out of reach. Lena, a young girl who lived in the village, had heard the stories from the elders since she was a child. She grew up listening to the older villagers talk about the magical creatures of the forest, fireflies that could light up the night like tiny stars, birds that sang songs no human had ever heard, and trees that could whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. But no one had ever ventured into the heart of the forest. The further you went, the more dangerous it became. The deeper you ventured, the more you were at the mercy of the forest's magic. Lena had always been curious. There was something about the forest that intrigued her, something about its ancient trees and hidden paths that called out to her. She would often stand at the edge of the village, looking out toward the forest, wondering what lay beyond. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she could hear strange sounds coming from deep within, whispers, rustling leaves, the distant cry of some unknown animal. It made her heart race with excitement and fear. One bright morning, after a night of heavy rain, Lena decided that today would be different. She had heard the stories, yes, but she had never seen the forest for herself. She wanted to know the truth. Was it really as magical and dangerous as they said? Or was it simply a place of wonder, waiting to be explored? As she walked toward the edge of the village, she took one last look back at her home. Her mother was busy with her usual chores, and her father was out working in the fields. No one would miss her for a few hours. The path into the forest was not far, and she had always been careful not to go too deep. But today, she felt a strange pull, an urge to follow the mysterious path that everyone had spoken about, the path that led into the heart of the enchanted forest. She passed through the village gates and stepped onto the narrow dirt road that led into the forest. The air smelled fresh, cool, and earthy. The rain had washed away the dust, and the forest seemed to sparkle with life. The trees, their bark dark and gnarled, seemed to stretch higher into the sky than ever before. As she walked deeper into the forest, she noticed how different it felt from the village. The village was warm and full of light, but the forest felt cool and shaded, with pockets of dark, quiet corners. The wind rustled through the leaves above her, making the branches sway gently. It was peaceful, almost soothing. The only sounds she could hear were the chirping of distant birds, the rustling of leaves, and the soft crunch of her boots on the wet ground. She walked for a while, and after a few minutes, she came to a fork in the path. To the left, the path seemed to climb up a hill, winding through thick bushes and trees. To the right, the path seemed to disappear into a dark thicket of tall ferns and low-hanging branches. Lena stood still, considering her options. The right path seemed more inviting, though it was unclear where it might lead. The left path was well-trodden, perhaps the safer option, but it felt too familiar. The right path was unknown, and Lena loved the idea of exploring something that no one else had dared to. Without much thought, she chose the right path, stepping carefully between the ferns and over the fallen branches that lay in her way. Part 2. As Lena continued down the path, she noticed that the forest seemed to grow darker. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out more and more of the light. The air felt cooler now, almost damp, and the sounds of the forest had become muffled. It was as if the forest was closing in around her, wrapping her in its embrace. Lena paused for a moment and looked around. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for her to walk through without brushing against the branches on either side. The ferns were thick, their fronds pressing against her legs. She could hear the distant sound of rushing water, but she couldn't see where it was coming from. For the first time, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. Had she made the right choice? Was this path leading her deeper into the forest than she had intended? But just as she was about to turn back, something caught her eye. Through a gap in the trees, she could see a faint glow in the distance. It wasn't the sunlight filtering through the leaves, it was something else, something bright, something magical. Intrigued, Lena stepped forward, her heart beating faster as she drew closer to the mysterious light. The path curved around a large rock, and as she rounded the bend, she came upon the source of the light. In front of her was a small clearing, bathed in a soft, golden glow. At the center of the clearing was an enormous tree, its trunk wide and gnarled, with branches that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The tree's bark shimmered in the light as though it was alive with energy. The ground around the tree was covered in a carpet of soft moss, and delicate flowers bloomed in every color imaginable, their petals glowing faintly in the light. Lena stood in awe, her breath catching in her throat. This was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The forest was beautiful, yes, but this was something special. It was as if she had stumbled upon a hidden treasure, a secret that no one else knew about. She stepped forward, her feet silent on the moss. As she approached the tree, she felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if the tree itself was calling to her. She reached out and touched its bark, and in that moment, she felt a jolt of energy shoot through her fingers, as if the tree was alive and responding to her touch. A voice, soft and distant, seemed to echo in her mind. It was a voice unlike any she had ever heard before, and yet it felt familiar, as though it was a voice from the past, from the very heart of the forest. "You have found the heart of the forest," the voice said. "The magic that flows through this land is ancient, and you are the one chosen to protect it." Lena stepped back in surprise, her heart racing. She had heard stories of the forest's magic, but this was real. The tree was speaking to her. She could feel its power, its ancient energy flowing through her veins. For a moment, Lena stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. But the voice continued, gentle yet firm. "You have a great responsibility, Lena," the voice said. "The balance of this forest is shifting. The village, the forest, and all who live here are connected. The time has come for you to learn the truth and protect this magic from those who would seek to destroy it." Lena nodded slowly, though she didn't fully understand what the tree meant. What did she have to do? How could she protect something so powerful? The weight of the forest's magic seemed to press down on her, but she also felt an incredible sense of purpose. "You must go to the village and speak to the elders," the voice said. "They will help you understand what must be done. You cannot do it alone." Lena turned and started walking back along the path, her mind racing with questions. She knew that her life had just changed forever. The Enchanted Forest had chosen her, and she was about to embark on an adventure unlike anything she could have imagined. Part 3. As Lena made her way back through the forest, the sense of wonder and magic that had filled her just moments ago slowly began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of responsibility. The forest, with all its ancient secrets and untold power, was no longer just a place of mystery, it was a place that needed protection. She couldn't help but wonder why the forest had chosen her. What did it mean for her, a simple village girl, to be entrusted with such a powerful responsibility? Her thoughts were interrupted as the sound of rushing water grew louder. She had almost forgotten about the stream she had heard earlier, and now, as she turned a corner, she found herself standing at the edge of a sparkling river. The water flowed quickly over smooth stones, its surface shimmering in the dim light of the forest. On the far side of the river, the path continued, winding through the trees. It was clear that the river marked a boundary of sorts, a barrier between the part of the forest she knew and the deeper, more mysterious regions that lay beyond. For a moment, Lena stood still, considering the next step. The voice from the tree had told her to go to the village and speak with the elders, but she felt a strong pull to continue deeper into the forest. Something about the river seemed to call to her, as if it was offering a way to cross into the heart of the forest. But no, she reminded herself, the village was waiting. The elders would have answers, and the forest's magic needed their guidance. Reluctantly, Lena turned away from the river and continued along the path. The forest was still and silent, as if holding its breath, watching her every step. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something much bigger than she could comprehend. Part 4. As Lena approached the village, the trees began to thin out, and the familiar sight of the village fields came into view. The houses, small and neat, were scattered along the dirt roads, their thatched roofs glowing golden in the afternoon sun. The village square, where the market stalls were usually set up, was quiet now. Most of the villagers were at home, finishing their daily chores. Lena's steps quickened as she neared her house. Her parents would be expecting her, and she wasn't sure how to explain what she had experienced. She had touched the tree, heard its voice, and felt the magic surge through her. How could she explain that? How could she tell them that the Enchanted Forest wasn't just a place of stories, but a living, breathing entity that needed protection? When she reached her home, she found her mother in the garden, tending to the vegetables. Her father was inside, repairing a chair that had broken. Lena stood at the edge of the garden for a moment, watching her mother's graceful movements as she carefully pulled weeds from the soil. The peacefulness of the scene only deepened Lena's sense of urgency. This wasn't just a normal day. The forest was changing, and she had been chosen to help protect it. Lena's mother looked up as she heard her daughter's footsteps. "Lena, you're back. I didn't expect you to be home so soon." Lena smiled weakly, but there was an unfamiliar weight in her chest. She had always felt close to her mother, but now it felt as though there was a distance between them. She had learned something that couldn't easily be shared, and she wasn't sure how to begin explaining it. "Mother," Lena said hesitantly, "I went to the forest." Her mother's face immediately softened. "I know you've always been curious, Lena, but you must be careful. The forest is dangerous. It's not a place for children to wander. Why don't you come inside and tell me what you saw?" Lena nodded and stepped into the house. Her father looked up from his work as she entered, and she could see the concern in his eyes. He too knew of the stories, of the dangers that the forest held. Lena sat down at the table, her mind swirling with everything she had seen and felt. Her parents sat across from her, waiting for her to speak. She took a deep breath and began to tell them everything: the voice from the tree, the magical light, the sense of responsibility that had filled her heart. She told them how she had touched the tree's bark and felt its power surge through her, how the voice had spoken to her and told her that she had been chosen. Her parents listened in silence, their faces unreadable. When she finished, there was a long pause. Finally, her father spoke. "This is serious, Lena," he said softly. "The forest has always been a place of magic, but magic is not something to take lightly. It can change people. It can change places. We don't know what's happening, but we do know that the forest is a part of our world, and if something is changing, we need to understand it. Her mother nodded, her expression serious. The elders will know more. We've always been taught to respect the forest, but now we must learn to understand it. Go to them, Lena, they'll help you. Lena felt a sense of relief wash over her. At least her parents didn't think she was imagining things. They understood the gravity of the situation, and they were right. The elders were the ones who had always known the forest's secrets. If anyone could help her make sense of what was happening, it was them. Part 5. The next morning, Lena set out for the village square where the elders often gathered. The sun was just rising, casting a soft, golden light across the village. As she walked, she passed the familiar homes, the flower gardens, and the fields of crops, but today everything felt different. The village seemed unchanged, yet Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the world around her was on the brink of something big. The forest was calling, and her life would never be the same. When she reached the square, she found the elders sitting under the large oak tree in the center. There were 5 of them, all older than Lena's parents, their faces weathered by years of wisdom and experience. They were deep in conversation, but as soon as they saw Lena approaching, they fell silent. The eldest of the elders, a man named Alaric, motioned for Lena to sit. His long white beard and piercing blue eyes gave him an air of authority, but his kind smile made him approachable. Lena, Alaric said gently, we have been expecting you. Lena felt her heart race, you know. Alaric nodded. The forest speaks to those who listen. We knew it would choose someone soon, and we had hoped it would be someone brave enough to understand its message. Lena sat down, her mind racing with questions, but what does it mean? The voice in the tree, it told me that the forest is changing, and I need to protect it, but how? I don't understand. The other elders exchanged knowing glances. Then one of them, a woman named Alicia, spoke. The forest is more than just trees and animals, Lena, it is the heart of our village. It gives us life, and it has always kept the balance between the known world and the world of magic. But something is happening, a dark force is threatening that balance. It is up to you and the forest to stop it. Lena felt her pulse quicken. A dark force, what could it be? The forest had always been a place of wonder and beauty. How could something dark be lurking within it? You're not alone, Alicia continued. The forest will guide you, but you must be ready to face the unknown. The magic is strong, but it can also be dangerous. You must trust in yourself. Lena, you are the key to restoring balance. Lena felt a sense of determination rising within her. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew that she had to try. The forest had chosen her for a reason, and she wouldn't let it down. I will do whatever it takes, Lena said, her voice firm. Part 6. Lena left the elders with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. As she walked back toward the edge of the village, the weight of their words lingered in the air around her. A dark force was threatening the forest, and only she had the power to stop it. The forest, which had once seemed so beautiful and peaceful, was now a place of danger and uncertainty. But she couldn't turn away from the challenge. The village, her home, depended on the balance the forest provided. Without it, everything would fall apart. The sky was beginning to darken as Lena approached the edge of the village where the path into the forest began. The air was thick, coupled with the scent of wet earth, a reminder of the rain from the previous night. She knew that the forest would not give up its secrets easily. There would be tests along the way, trials that would push her to her limits, but she had no choice. The elders had entrusted her with this responsibility, and she couldn't fail them. With determination in her heart, Lena stepped into the forest once more. This time, she wasn't just an observer. She was part of the forest's story, its protector. She walked deeper into the woods, her senses heightened. The forest seemed different now. The trees, once welcoming, now felt like silent sentinels, watching her every move. The path before her was overgrown, as if it had not been used for years, and she knew that this was the way she needed to go. Part 7. The deeper Lena ventured, the more intense the atmosphere became. The forest seemed to grow darker with every step, the sunlight struggling to pierce through the thick canopy overhead. The air was cooler, and an uneasy silence had settled over the trees. The birds had stopped singing, and the usual rustling of small creatures in the underbrush had ceased. Lena's footsteps felt muffled on the soft ground, as if the forest itself didn't want her to make a sound. Her heart began to race as she approached a large clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone circle covered in moss and vines. The stones were tall and imposing, their surfaces etched with symbols that Lena didn't recognize. They looked as though they had been there for centuries, waiting for someone to unlock their secrets. Lena stepped forward cautiously, her breath catching in her throat as she examined the stones. They hummed with a faint energy, and she could feel a pull toward them, as if the stones were calling to her. She didn't know why, but something told her that this was an important part of her journey. As she touched one of the stones, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, making the trees sway and the leaves swirl around her. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air crackled with energy. Lena stepped back in surprise, her heart racing. Had she done something wrong? But then a voice echoed through the clearing, soft and distant, but unmistakable. It was the same voice she had heard from the ancient tree earlier, the voice that had guided her on her path. "Lena," the voice said, "you have come to the heart of the forest, the place where the magic begins. The stone circle is a key to understanding the balance between the world of humans and the world of magic. You must learn its secrets to protect both." Lena's mind was spinning. She had so many questions, but the voice didn't answer them. Instead, it spoke again, its tone urgent. "Beware, Lena, the dark force that threatens the forest is already here. It takes many forms, and it will stop at nothing to destroy the magic that binds the forest and the village together. You must find the source of this darkness and stop it before it is too late." Lena took a deep breath and nodded. She didn't fully understand what the voice meant, but she knew one thing for sure: the forest was in danger, and it was up to her to save it. Part 8. With a sense of purpose, Lena left the stone circle and continued her journey through the forest. The air had grown colder, and the path before her was shrouded in mist. She felt as though she was walking through a dream, each step taking her further away from the world she knew and deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches like outstretched arms, guiding her forward. As she walked, Lena couldn't help but feel the presence of something watching her. It wasn't a feeling of being alone, but of being surrounded by eyes, by something unseen but ever present. She had heard stories of the forest's guardians, magical beings that protected the woods and its secrets. Some villagers claimed to have seen them, others insisted they were nothing more than myth. But Lena now knew the truth: the forest was alive with magic, and the guardians were real. Whether she could see them or not, they were there, watching over her. The mist grew thicker, and the forest became quieter, the usual sounds of animals and birds replaced by an eerie silence. As Lena moved deeper into the fog, she saw a figure in the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow barely visible through the mist. But as she drew closer, the figure became clearer: a tall, slender being, cloaked in dark robes, with a hood that obscured its face. Lena stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure stood motionless, its presence like a cold wind that seemed to freeze the very air around her. She knew instinctively that this was no ordinary traveler. This was something else. This was the darkness the voice had warned her about. The figure raised its head slowly, and Lena could feel its gaze upon her, even though she could not see its eyes. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, the figure spoke. "You have come too far, child. it said. "The forest is mine now. The magic is mine to control. You cannot stop what is already in motion." Lena took a step back, but she stood firm. She had to protect the forest. She couldn't let this dark force destroy everything. "I won't let you take it," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "The forest belongs to the people and the magic, not to you." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the fog. "You are foolish if you think you can stop me. You are nothing more than a child, playing in a world you don't understand." Lena clenched her fists, gathering her courage. "I may be young, but I understand enough to know that the forest is not yours to control. I will stop you, no matter what it takes." The figure's smile faded, and for the first time, Lena saw a flash of anger in its eyes. It raised its hand, and the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The trees around her groaned as if in pain, their leaves rustling violently in the wind. The forest was reacting to the darkness that was taking root. But Lena didn't falter. She remembered the voice of the tree, the guidance it had given her, and the power that she had felt in the stone circle. She wasn't alone. The magic of the forest was with her, and she was determined to protect it. With a sudden burst of energy, Lena extended her hand, and the air around her seemed to crackle with power. The figure staggered back, surprised by the force of her magic. The forest responded to Lena's call, the trees shifting, the wind swirling around her like a protective shield. "You will not win," Lena said. "I will fight to protect this forest." The dark figure snarled, its form flickering like a shadow in the wind. But as the mist began to clear, it retreated, vanishing into the depths of the forest. Lena stood in the clearing, her heart still racing, but a sense of calm settling over her. She had faced the darkness, and for now, she had won. But she knew that the battle was far from over. The dark force would return, and she would have to be ready. Part 9. Lena returned to the village later that day, exhausted but determined. The villagers greeted her with concern, but Lena kept her encounter with the dark figure to herself. She needed time to process what had happened and to prepare for the next steps. The forest was far from safe, and she could feel the tension in the air as though the land itself was waiting for the final confrontation. That night, as Lena lay in bed, she reflected on everything she had learned. The voice in the forest had told her that she was the protector, but it hadn't explained how to stop the darkness for good. There was more she needed to learn, more power to unlock. She couldn't do it alone. And so Lena made a decision. Tomorrow she would go back to the elders, seek their guidance, and learn everything they knew about the magic of the Enchanted Forest. The darkness was coming, but she would be ready. Final part. Lena woke early the next morning, the weight of the previous day's events still heavy on her shoulders. She knew the battle with the dark force wasn't over and the forest's magic was still in danger. But she felt different now, stronger, more connected to the forest than ever before. The voice of the ancient tree echoed in her mind, reminding her that she had the power to protect the forest if she could unlock its deepest secrets. After a quiet breakfast, Lena set off toward the heart of the forest once more. This time, she didn't feel afraid. The magic was with her, and she knew it. She passed the stone circle where she had encountered the dark force, and this time the stones seemed to hum in response to her presence as if they were welcoming her back. She continued on the path, deeper into the forest, where the trees grew taller and the mist hung thicker than ever. But she didn't hesitate. The forest was waiting for her, and she could feel it. Finally, she arrived at the clearing where she had first encountered the dark figure. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. The mist had cleared, and the air was still. The trees stood tall, their branches stretching toward the sky. Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve was unshakable. She knew the final confrontation was coming, and she was ready. As if on cue, the dark figure appeared once again, its tall, shadowy form emerging from the mist. It did not speak this time, but Lena could feel its presence, its power. The time for words had passed. The battle would be fought with magic, not words. Lena raised her hands, calling upon the magic of the forest. The trees around her seemed to stir, their leaves rustling as if in response to her call. The wind picked up, swirling around her and the dark figure. The forest was alive with energy, and Lena could feel its power flowing through her. The dark figure raised its own hands, and a surge of dark energy shot toward Lena. She stood firm, her heart steady, and she released the power of the forest in response. The two forces collided in a burst of light and darkness, a crackling explosion that shook the ground beneath their feet. The trees around them creaked and groaned as the two energies clashed, their branches swaying wildly. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a final surge of power, Lena's magic broke through. The dark figure staggered back, its form flickering and weakening. Lena's magic surrounded it, pushing it back until it finally dissipated into the mist, vanishing without a trace. Lena stood there, breathing heavily, her body trembling from the intensity of the battle. She had done it. The dark force was gone, and the forest was safe once again. The trees around her seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, and the air became warmer, lighter. The forest had been saved, but Lena knew this victory was only part of her journey. She had unlocked the power of the forest, but there was still much to learn. The forest was vast, and its secrets were many. She could feel the presence of the ancient guardians watching over her, guiding her on the path ahead. As she made her way back to the village, Lena felt a deep sense of peace. The bond between the village and the forest was restored, and she had fulfilled her role as protector. But she knew her work was far from over. The forest had many more secrets to reveal, and she was ready to uncover them one by one. And so, Lena's journey continued, not just as a protector, but as a learner, a guardian, and a link between the world of humans and the world of magic. The Enchanted Forest had entrusted her with its future, and she would never stop protecting it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The end.